Good day to all of you. Dear students, we are starting a new topic in methodology of literature. After marginalization, we need to learn more about the cultural approaches. And under this title, Cultural Approaches, you have several subtitles, and the first one being the post-colonialism. Let's see what post-colonialism is. You find that the term post-colonialism can mean something that came after colonialism, but actually it is not so, because anything and everything that came with colonialism can be listed as post-colonialism. What about the actual fact about colonialism? You find in your text that it is actually in literary criticism, it is a theory or a theoretical framework used to analyze literature and other cultural productions written at any time following a nation's initial contact with the colonial oppressor. So again the question comes, what is post-colonialism? Bill Ashcroft, Garrett Griffiths and Helen Tiffin state that it covers all the culture affected by the imperial process from the moment of colonization to the present day. And again, you have the other option about colonialism, and that is it refers to the twin phases of the colonial project: the formal dismantling of colonial political or administrative machinery and the emergence of late capitalist economies. So we have before us a lot of definitions, or in a way explanations as to what is meant by post-colonialism. Here we are going to learn about post-colonialism as a literary theory. It is a theory which emerged as a reaction to the domination of the world by European colonizers and the universalist claims of the Enlightenment. So when you speak about the domination by the colonizers, it means the domination of continents of Africa, Asia, Australia, and South America. Again, you find that the European colonizers had codified or set a standard, and that standard is the measurement. The standard, the European standard, which is used to measure the colonies with. Cultural codification from the standard European perspective, like literature, arts, music, food habits, learning, languages, mythologies, etc. Then again, white or European way became the standard to evaluate those of the other. This imperialistic claim is rejected by the post-colonial theorists. As I told you earlier, when the colonizers started colonizing the continents of Asia, Africa, Australia, and South America, they brought with them their European standards, and they applied this in literature, arts, music, food habits, learning, languages, mythologies, and whatnot. So naturally, the people or the literature from the colonies never added up to the standard of the Europeans. And again, there is the white or the European way is indeed the right one. Because of the skin tone difference, the black or the brown were regarded as inferior. So you find that these are the white or the European way was the standard to evaluate the standards of the other. The other here refers to the colonized. this claim of the imperialistic nations, that is the colonizers, was rejected by the post-colonial theorists. They have their own view. So why should they say that the colonies have their own culture, their own literature, their own music, especially regarding food habits also they are different. Languages definitely. And so learning also in all these different aspects they have their own view or their own particular way of teaching or learning. So why should they bow down to the European standard? Because each country has got its own individualistic way or culture, and this is why the post-colonial theorists totally rejected the imperialistic claim. Frantz Fanon had written two works, and that is The Wretched of the Earth, which was published in the year 1963, and Black Skin, White Mask, written in the year 1967. Both discussed the psychology of colonialism. Mind you, this is indeed a great stride in the field called post-colonial studies. And Frantz Fanon had really analyzed the colonial aspect, and he was quite forthright in his opinions. Let's see what they are. That is, imposition of the white values like Western languages and religion over the black skin created a schizophrenic identity. Violence, and as a result of which the national consciousness formed by national literature and national cultures were also taken into consideration. When Fanon had come up with this view, that is, the imposition of white values like Western languages and religion over the black skin, he knew quite well that the black skin or the brown skin is not going to accept the white values or even the Western languages and religion. We all know that colonization started with religion. It is as missionaries these colonizers came over to the different countries. They started preaching their religion, and later the others came with trade, and certain others afterwards came with the idea of governing these places so that they need not depend on these so-called pagan, and they can just transport the wealth from these colonies to enrich their own motherland. So they have their own white values which they are not ready to discard, nor are they willing enough to look into the colonized people and their values. And especially language, they refuse to learn the language of the colonies. They used intermediaries for that purpose, and they tried to impose Western language also on these colonized. Again, when with regard to violence, when people started protesting and trying to exert their identity from the colonies, naturally national consciousness was formed by national literatures and national cultures. So altogether, you find a totally moving from one aspect to the other, and a growing awareness of their own motherland being there for the colonized. So this is another aspect of post-colonialism. Then there is the process of decolonization and reclaiming one's cultural past, its strategic use, and finally a purgation of the culture after the end of colonialism. So the process of decolonization, where even when it started, you find that the the colonizers did not leave everything to the colonies. On the other hand, they tried to impose certain aspects of their country on these colonized people. So even though the colonization process was going on, they refused to give up their power over these colonies. So they really wanted to exert some kind of authority over them. And as you all know that we are in the month of August, and August 15th is really special for us, and we know the number of people who had sacrificed their life and also their career and everything in order to achieve this independence for them. Independence from the rule of the colonizer. But at the same time, even though we got the independence, we were not totally rejecting what the colonizers had left us. Of course, there is good and there is bad in it, but at the same time, it is indeed time to reclaim one's cultural past. And the cultural past of India is something that we really are quite proud of. But it took us a lot of time to get past the hangover of being ruled by the English and also the English manners, mannerisms, culture, and the standards, the English standards. But the proper use of the cultural past, its strategic use, and finally a purgation of the culture after the end of colonialism. Purgation means a proper cleaning or cleansing of the culture which was indeed mixed by or contaminated by the British culture, or what the so-called British tried to put a stigma on. To them, only the British culture or the white culture was indeed the standard culture. All the others were regarded as not the standard ones and also not of much use or not to be regarded in its proper manner. So it takes time to reclaim our past or cultural past and clean it of the amalgams or the inferiorities or the things that have been invaded into it, and then have a pure culture after the end of colonialism. Again, you find that while India, I have taken the example of India because I know that you are all sure of the history of India and you have gone through the different stages of independence struggle and also the history that we are learning and also what happened after independence, the way India is trying to stand on its own 2 feet. But let's take the condition of the people in the other countries. As I told you earlier, several continents were colonized, and this had resulted in the condition of the colonized in a totally different frame of mind. And somehow or other, India was lucky enough to regain its status and have an individuality all by itself. But this was not the case with a lot of other countries. For instance, Pan-Africanism of Aimé Césaire and Leopold Senghor, they are indeed important names. Aimé Césaire stressed the concept of negritude, taking Harlem Renaissance as foundation. Because in America, as you all know, the black people from Africa were brought in to work in the plantations. They were treated not as servants but as unpaid slaves. And so you find that not one generation but several generations of these people brought from Africa worked in these plantations and had their life in America. And later, when they got independence, their children and grandchildren became free, but they were still black and they had just associated themselves to, they were grouped in one place and they really started for equal rights. It's not enough that they got freedom, but they also should have equal rights. You must have listened to the speech of Martin Luther King and how he had emphasized the point of getting a blank check which cannot be cashed anyway. This was how the independence was to them. A check which was not cashed anyway. They had independence, they need not be slaves, but they have no way of being accepted in the white society, and this was making their life totally miserable. So there was another uprising, and naturally, this is what made them think of the Harlem Renaissance and also the Pan Africanism. Again, their main aim was forge a collective identity beyond national boundaries. They would like to be acknowledged as black people coming from Africa and have a collective identity beyond the national boundaries like Africa or America or Australia. Wherever they are, they would like to have an identity beyond these national boundaries, and this identity is that of Africanism and not of American. Even though they have not been to Africa, their parents had not been to Africa, they were, as I told you, brought from Africa at one point, and they have been there in America for a long, long time. So, Pan-Africanism emphasized to the point of forging a collective identity beyond national boundaries. Leopold Senghor came up with the Africanite, that is another form of negritude. So here you find Africanites and negritude, two aspects of the same people coming up, and naturally the people worked towards that. But Bill Ashcroft and his fellow editors summarizes the pitfalls of negritude in their famous book called The Empire Writes Back, and they summarize the situation in this manner. Black culture was emotional rather than rational. It stressed integration and wholeness over analysis and dissection. It operated by distinctive rhythmic and temporal principles and so forth. So they were summarizing the works or even the doings of the Africans or the black people in America. And they summarize the pitfalls of negritude, or what are the different pitfalls of fighting for this negritude. They come up with a real answer because black culture was emotional rather than rational, and it stressed integration or unity and wholeness over analysis and dissection. Actually, they should have an analysis and dissection as to what their real problems are, and not just ask for integration and wholeness, because that call will be answered by the people, but the problems remain the problems. And it is in this sense they say that there is the analysis and dissection were lacking. It operated by distinctive rhythmic and temporal principles and so forth. Distinctive, clear, rhythmic and temporal principles and so forth. And so it is in this manner they summarized the pitfalls of negritude. Again, you find that this rising did not last much long, and there is the second wave of post-colonialism. When we speak about second wave of post-colonialism, the most important work is Orientalism, published in the year 1978 by Edward Said. This is indeed a remarkable work. But along with Said, you have Homi K. Bhabha and Gayatri Spivak. The three of them together were called as the Holy Trinity of post-colonial theory. That is Edward Said, Homi K. Bhabha and Gayatri Spivak. They are the Holy Trinity of post-colonial theory, and they belong to the second wave of post-colonialism. Let's see what Said has to say about Orientalism, or in his book Orientalism. Said's arguments are like this. Pagan East becomes the other of Christian Europe. Hence, Orientalism is a form of epistemological imperialism. So, as I told you earlier, the Western countries, from the Western countries, people came over to the other continents as missionaries to preach their religion, especially Christianity. You have a lot of Christian missionaries coming over, and some of them remained, some of them were martyrs, but you will find a lot of them had contributed much to the development of either language or culture or even education. But you find that all of them regarded East as pagan because they refused to acknowledge the gods or goddesses of the Easterners or that of the Orient. And so the East becomes the other. The other is O is capital in the other, which means that this is the word that is used to denote the people from the East. And so it becomes the other of Christian Europe. Europe is definitely Christian. There is no question about it. So here, to them, all that comes from the East is pagan. Hence, Orientalism is a form of epistemological imperialism because the imperialist or the colonizers look upon pagan East and the culture of the East as Orientalism as an epistemological imperialism and not in its right sense. Eastern systems of knowledge, ethnology, archaeology, music, philosophy, literature, and so on, were indispensable for the construction of superior Europe, sanctifying the civilizing mission of colonialism, Orient as the binary opposite of the Occident. Again, you find Said's argument following these different aspects. He is of the opinion that the Eastern systems of knowledge, we have indeed our own system of knowledge. Though it is not like the European, we have our own way of learning mathematics, language, and a lot of sciences, including Ayurveda or the medicine of India. All these were really very powerful at that time. People depended on that. So Eastern systems of knowledge, ethnography, archaeology, and even music. You have the Carnatic music, you have the Hindustani music and whatnot, and archaeology also, and philosophy. We had a lot of philosophers in India, and you find that when you take Indian philosophy, like for example, you have the Vedas and you have the Buddhist philosophy and a lot of philosophers from India, and it is based on Indian culture. So you can't really compare that to the Western philosophy or Western culture. But the white man really tried to put his standard on all these things and found them quite lacking, naturally, because we have our own philosophy or literature, music, whatever, our knowledge, everything based on Indian culture, not on European standards. So naturally, these systems were indispensable for the colonizers for the construction of superior Europe, for the construction of a superior Europe. When you, because you are a literature main students, I'm sure that you have come across Victorian England and even Elizabethan England and also the Romantic age and so on. When you come across Victorian England, you will find that England was really rich. How did England become so rich? And Europe also was culturally superior. And when you check upon these facts, you will find that these countries, both Europe and including England, they brought in wealth from their colonies abroad, and it was quite easily available to them because they did not buy it from there, they just took it from the colonies and started constructing a culture or feeding on or making their life really wealthy and also improving their culture with the help of the Eastern knowledge and thus constructing a superior Europe. Europe was definitely superior at that time. At the same time, they were sanctifying the civilizing mission of colonialism because they thought that it is their duty to educate these pagan people, these people who were less than human beings, because to them only the white man is the superior or human being. All the others, they are pagans because they worship a totally different god, not the god of the Europeans, and their culture is something that is totally different from the European standards. So to them, they are not saying that they are strange or different, but they are saying that they are inferior or not worth considering. This is the attitude of the colonizer, and naturally they took it upon themselves to educate them, to convert them, and also to trade with them in their own way, so that new things from Europe and England were introduced to India, thinking that they are trying to make the Indians more like the British people or the colonizers. But in a way, they do not want them to be as equal to them as any other white man, because these people will always have their skin tone brown or black, and they have to remain as such. But this changing them or civilizing them is regarded by the Europeans as their sanctifying mission, or this is the reason they said that they have colonized these countries. A very flimsy reason, but at the same time, we know that under this banner, they were trying to loot the country and trying to take everything from India and from the other colonies. So, Orient is regarded as the binary opposite of the Occident. Orient means that which concerns East, Occident means that of the West. For example, Edward Said shows how British Orientalists interpreted the Hindu and Muslim traditions, and you will find a number of examples. One example that is taken by a translator is that several people who came and visited India, several white men who visited India, they took away the memories or even the culture of India, and wrote about it for the people of England, and they interpreted the Hindu texts or the Hindu gods and goddesses in a worse manner possible. And also, the story of the Mahabharata is taken as something that is beyond their understanding, and something that is not like a civilized group of people. The same goes for the Muslim traditions and how these were pictured by the British Orientalists or the British people or the white men studying or learning about Orientalism, and taking it to the white men, and not in its proper manner, but in a totally atrocious manner, means in a horrible manner. Because when you go through their text, you are really astonished. This is not the meaning of those texts, and this is not the interpretation that is given to the culture of India. They have totally misunderstood it, or they really wanted to picture these people as pagans and even savages, people without any culture. This is how the British Orientalists interpreted the Hindu and Muslim traditions according to Said. He continues to show that in his work, the work called Orientalism. Said exposes the Eurocentrism of the literature produced in the post-Enlightened Europe in his work Culture and Imperialism, which was published in the year 1994. So, Eurocentrism of the literature produced in the post-enlightened Europe, because they, even though they have colonized these countries, they did not think much of these countries. On the other hand, they were trying to emphasize the importance of Europe in their literature also. And even in the enlightened Europe, enlightened in the sense people who had been there after Renaissance, and also much enlightened by the conversion or even the changes that are happening throughout the country, they had in a way uh, made it as if though Europe is the center of the world itself, as if it is that center which is really important, and this was really reflected in the literature of that particular period. According to Said, Orientalism is but one manifestation of imperialism, and that in their pursuit of empire, Europe and America have used their cultural forms, including such ideals as freedom and individualism, as means of conquest and domination. So, the term Orientalism is taken in a derogatory manner in the sense that Orientalism is used by the white men in a very sarcastic, maybe in a totally out of context manner, and it is one of the manifestation of imperialism, and in their pursuit of empire, that is, in the pursuit of building up an empire, both Europe and America have used their cultural forms, including such ideals as freedom, individualism, all these as a means of conquest and domination. Conquest and also for domination of these countries like Asia, Africa, and Australia, and so many other countries. So this is the conclusion of Edward Said in his book Culture and Imperialism. Said also takes the novels of Jane Austen, Rudyard Kipling, Joseph Conrad, and Albert Camus and tries to show them as part of the relationship between culture and empire. So, why are the novels of Jane Austen, Rudyard Kipling, Conrad, and Camus really important in this connection, especially in connection with post-colonialism? Say takes the example of The Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. So, who is this Jane Austen? I'll take just one example, that is that of Jane Austen. Jane Austen is a writer who wrote about the things that she had first-hand knowledge of. She was able to listen to the talk of people who had traveled and visited her place, and she had taken part in the parties that were there, and from there also she had gleaned glimpses of the other places, especially the colonies, and she had written novels about it. In a way, she had analyzed human emotions, and she did not write about anything that she had not known, or about something that she had no idea. She is not a person who imagined and wrote or created a world totally different from the world that she had known. On the other hand, she wrote about the world that she knew quite well and not about anything else. So she had written Pride and Prejudice, The Mansfield Park, and a great number of other novels. And I'm sure that once you start reading Pride and Prejudice, you are going to enjoy the novel, even though it was written several years back. And you will find that it is about girls of a family, all of marriageable age, and their ideas about their bridegroom, and at the same time, the mother's ideas about the grooms for her daughters. So, in a way, it is a little bit humorous, but at the same time, it is a lot of reality, and it is that she speaks of. In Mansfield Park also, Jane Austen examines the ideas her own manner, and there is again Rudyard Kipling, Joseph Conrad, and Albert Camus. And in all these writers, they explain, or they keep up the idea of the British England, and Conrad is exposing the black heart of the white man in the novel called Heart of Darkness. So Joseph Conrad and his novel Heart of Darkness is really important because it's a very thin novel, and it is written at one stretch without dividing it into paragraphs even, and not caring about the conversation. It's just narration. It's a man going in search of another person who had gone to Africa, the dark continent, and how he had gone native. Gone native means he had discarded all his polish of white man and white culture. He had taken a native wife and had become one of the natives there, in spite of his white skin. This is not tolerated by the British because they really wanted him to amass the wealth of Africa. And when it is not coming, they are now sending a search party and they are trying to see why he is not taking up the number of elephant tusks and this the ivory as they called it, and why it is not coming over to the colonizers place. So naturally this exposes the dark heart of the white man or the colonizer. And it is not just about the dark continent Africa, it is about the darkness inside the heart of colonization. And it is these novels that Said is taking and putting before us for a rereading. And you will find the novels of Rudyard Kipling and Albert Camus and writings of Albert Camus, and he tries to show them as part of the relationship between culture and empire. Conrad had really emphasized the culture of Africa and also the empire, how they regarded that culture. And to them, it is not a culture at all. They are just savages, and their language is beyond understanding because the colonizer refused to take up the language or even tries to make an attempt to learn the language of the colonized. So you find that Said comes to certain one more conclusion, and that is by contrapunctal reading or by contrast, the order and civilization of the estate in England has its economic base in another estate of the Caribbean colony of Antigua, where the sugar plantation was made possible by the institution of slave labor. So you find that by a contrast reading, the order and civilization of the estate in England, because the English people say that they are civilized and there is much order in their country and their estates are well run. How is it possible for them to have so much money? Because the economic base of that is in another estate of the Caribbean colony of Antigua, where the sugar plantation was made possible by the institution of slave labor. Caribbean colony and the use of slaves, all these in a way helps them to have much profit because they need not pay the slaves. So the profit as such goes to the owner, and that profit is used to improve the estates in England and have the so-called civilization kept intact. So actually they need to depend on the colonies to keep their civilization intact. This is what Said is concluding, or Said is saying in his work about Orientalism and also about the culture of the culture, that is that of the colonized. Again, you find that there is the other writer, that is, you have the three writers, that is Edward Said, Homai K. Bhabha, then Gayatri Spivak. About Gayatri Spivak, you have already learned or you had some points in the Dalit literature, and also how the empire writes back, or can the subaltern speak. Under the title Subaltern, she also has written a lot about it and also concludes on certain lines. We have come across that. Now it is Homai K. Bhabha. He uses Lacanian psychoanalytic principles, then Foucault's discourses of power, and Derrida's post-structural hypothesis to, to formulate his own theory of post-colonialism. Lacan, Foucault, Derrida are all theorists about whom you have learned in detail. I need not say much about them. The psychoanalytic principle of Lacan, Foucault's discourses of power, Derrida's post-structural hypothesis are used by Homai K. Bhabha in order to formulate the post-colonial theory. His theories concentrate on fissures, and that is fissures like gaps and disturbances that exist within colonial texts. Gaps and disturbances, what are they? The gaps, why should we have gaps and disturbances within the colonial text? The colonizer is indeed supreme, and the colonized is indeed the victim. Why should, even then, when the one person who is in authority should have gaps and also disturbances within these colonial texts? It is in order to find that he formulates certain theories. So his theories are based on certain fissures that are there in the colonial text. He finds them having certain cracks, and those cracks need a lot of explanation. So he formulated certain concepts. His main concepts in The Location of Culture, which was published in the year 1994, is more about mimicry, ambivalence, and hybridity, because he feels that psychoanalytic theory is necessary, discourse of power is necessary, then post-structural hypothesis. Discourse of power is definitely necessary because it is the colonizer and the colonized. Then post-structural hypothesis, what happens to these people when the power is taken from them? Or why do they suppress the colonies or the colonized? So all these are questions which are examined in detail by Homaike Bhabha, and he had published it in The Location of Culture. And the three terms which you have to remember, students, is mimicry, ambivalence, and hybridity, because he feels that these fissures of the colonial texts can be explained effectively if you have the theories which are formulated by Homaike Bhabha, and one is mimicry, and the second is ambivalence, and the third is hybridity. If you take your dictionary meaning, you know what mimicry is. It is imitating, or imitating, miming, or mimic mime, or imitating the actions of one person or one thing. And so you have the mimicry contest, and you, as usual, you know what it is. That meaning is used in order to explain certain aspects of the fissures. And then again, ambivalence and hybridity. All these are terms which are explained in detail. And I would like you, dear students, to go through the colonial theory, post colonialism, its beginning, and why it is there, why it exists, and why theories were formulated, and how the rereading of certain English novels makes it possible to understand the attitude of the colonizer towards the colonies and how it is reflected in their mother country. All these we can understand. So do not forget, we have one more class regarding post-colonialism, and I think I will explain mimicry, ambivalence, and hybridity of Homaike Bhabha in the next class. Till then, I think it is time to say goodbye to you. Thank you.